Breaking news on the other side of the world, a lot to deal with here at home. A big and busy show. We will do all of it. We will not overdose in one direction or the other, just the stuff you need to know tonight, including the very latest is that Australia has been caught up in all of this. There was an Iranian drone strike which apparently had hit Australian facilities in and around Dubai. Thankfully, no one injured, no one hurt, but the Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister has detailed what happened a couple of days ago when Iran started to respond and they started to take aim at us.
There was some drones which did attack that base on the first night, I think. We have a number of Australians who operate from a headquarters that we've had at El Minhad now for many, many years. It's just outside of Dubai, about half an hour outside of Dubai. They are all accounted for. They are all safe.
Which is excellent news, but of course they are in the firing line. Now, the use of drones is something I want to talk about specifically with a military expert. We'll do that again a little bit later in the show. Number two, Iran is trying to get vengeance on the world by choking the oil supply. Now, last night I spoke about a specific stretch of water and the very narrow Strait of Hormuz. This is where Iran is now trying to stop any movement at all coming from the Middle East through that strait. They are saying that they will attack any ships that seek to do trade through that area. This matters because 20% of all of the world's oil travels through the Strait of Hormuz. 30% of total global trade in everything from oil, natural gas, and a whole collection of other things, including textiles. It all goes through this particular area. So instantly there is a choke point, and that choke point is going to cause major troubles around the world. In terms of Australia, now Australia doesn't drill for much oil here, and we don't even refine much oil here. So where does Australia get our oil from? We get it from Singapore, from South Korea, from Japan, from China and Malaysia. So you're thinking, phew, this doesn't affect us. Well, guess where Singapore, South Korea, Japan, China and Malaysia get their oil from? The UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. Can we bring that map up again of the strait where, obviously, the UAE may be an exit point, but with military from the United States on, say, the right of your screen, it's hard for anyone to pass through those active areas because either Iran's trying to hit those ships or they're saying anyone coming or going is going to be the problem. Thankfully in Australia, though, to deal with this global crisis where we don't produce enough oil, we don't produce enough fossil fuels that we are able to use to power our cars, machinery or a whole lot of other things, we've got Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, acting like the bloke from Choice magazine.
There is no need to rush to the service station and fill up. I do understand people's concerns, but it's important that people know we do have a good stock of petrol in reserve. There is no need for panic buying, but it will just make the situation worse.
We have about 25 days worth of fuel that is in stock. Now, again, I don't want to panic people that we're automatically digging into that reserve. There still is, obviously, a fair amount that will flow from those Southeast Asian nations, but at some point, depending on how long this goes, it may only be a few days, but we know the promise is for it to go at least a month. That choke point will eventually flow on. The most immediate and obvious thing is that price is going to go through the roof. The expectation is that by this time next week, we're going to be paying deep into $2 a litre, regardless of what you put into your car. Third thing to tell you about at the start of tonight's show, again, before we start to move towards some domestic news, Israel is, as we speak, pushing into Lebanon. The IDF have not spoken publicly, but have released the following message online, that IDF soldiers are operating in southern Lebanon and are positioned at several points near the border area as part of an entrenched forward defence posture. So it's not just about launching things towards southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah has had control, Hezbollah propped up by Iran, but ground troops might be making their way or are in Lebanon as we speak. We are conducting targeted strikes against the Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure. Hezbollah chose to attack Israel on behalf of the Iranian regime. It will bear the consequences of its actions. That's a live shot of what is happening right now in the capital of Lebanon, Beirut. There's even worse situations happening towards the south. Now, remember, ceasefires that applied to Lebanon at the end of last year and to Gaza were hard fought for, hard negotiated. Well, obviously, it's all bets are off, certainly to the north of Israel, as they try to keep themselves safe from the terrorists trying to do Iran's bidding after the leadership of Iran was wiped out. Fourth thing to tell you, more Americans have died in the past 24 hours. This causes trouble for pretty shaky support in America for what is going on right now. The New York Times has reported that the military deaths are now at 6 for the United States. They quote that Central Command had reported that 3 service members and 5 were seriously wounded on Sunday. Military officials said that those troops were killed after Iranians struck a base housing American troops in Kuwait. On Monday morning, that's American time, remember, they're only just turning into Tuesday morning now. We're at 6 minutes past 5 a.m. in New York and in DC. On Monday morning, the Central Command has said that one of the injured service members died as a result of their wounds. Again, Monday afternoon, Central Command has said that officials had received the remains of 2 previously unaccounted for troops from the facility that was struck, hence why we are now talking about 6 people who are part of the American Defence Forces who have lost their lives. Which brings me to point number 5. Not all, but parts of MAGA world weren't thrilled about all of this before it began, and their faith in what is happening seems to weaken by the day, especially when the death toll of Americans starts to rise. Now, much has been read into supposedly a lack of endorsement that was coming from somebody who's much closer to these MAGA officials. That, of course, is the Vice President, J.D. Vance. Now, he was, of course, put on the ticket in large part because many of the voices who you're about to hear who are voicing their wobbles said this was the man. They stood by him during the wobbly parts of the 2024 campaign. But, of course, we all know Trump is in charge. Plenty have noticed that the Vice President, who is unafraid of a camera or a microphone and pretty good with his fingers on social media, has not been doing much since all of this started, Saturday Australian time. It's now even being reported in American political circles, again, as the sun comes up there, that allies are apparently getting annoyed at the lack of chat that was coming from J.D. Vance. Well, he's attempted to get out in front of that. He did an interview just a few hours ago on Fox News, where, of course, his support for the president and his actions is bellicose.
He wanted to make sure that Iran could never have a nuclear weapon, and that would require fundamentally a change in mindset from the Iranian regime. So he saw that the Iranian regime was weakened. He knew that they were committed to getting on that brink of a nuclear weapon, and he decided to take action because he felt that was necessary in order to protect the nation's security.
Now, again, I don't believe that this is the beginning of another Iraq. I don't believe that this is the beginning of a 20-year military conflict like Afghanistan. But, of course, a big part of the MAGA agenda was to, frankly, not do things like this. We know that the timing was all related to the intelligence and the Iranian leadership all being in one room at one time. So this may well have been pressured up again for weeks or months, but we are where we are because of the intelligence and the opportunity to kill the Ayatollah and many of those who even the president had thought would have been potentially successors. So again, these are some of the voices that have backed in the president at almost every turn who are not backing this one in.
My own feeling is no one should have to die for a foreign country. I don't think those 4 service members died for the United States. I think they died for Iran or for Israel.
We should not do anything at all, anything, outside the borders of our country or within them, unless it will first and foremost benefit American citizens. And
the truth is, and this is hard to say, as a proud American and as someone who wants the United States to remain powerful in the world, a force for decency and order in the world, but above all wants America to remain prosperous and peaceful at home in the country that we actually live in. It's hard to say this, but the United States didn't make the decision here Benjamin Netanyahu did.
Now, obviously, we get a chance to talk to Megyn Kelly. We'll do that tomorrow. I'll push back and a little deeper on her thoughts on all of this. But again, while I don't believe this is Iraq, while I do not believe that this is Afghanistan, there is the possibility of more Americans losing their lives. The President has already made that very clear. Australian forces, which were not involved in the strikes on Iran, well, as I've told you tonight, they too are being targeted. And the expectation is that for some reason, Iran seems to have this limitless supply of drones, while their missile capability will eventually shrink. Apparently, their drone capability remains particularly strong. So I show you that, not as a way of backdooring my own thoughts on it, but for you to know that those who have helped the president in the past are not seemingly there when it comes to this situation. As for Trump, though, he's actually given, again, a series of off-camera interviews. This one he gave to a Substack called Inner Circle, where in a phone call with the podcast host, he said that particularly Megyn Kelly should study her history book a little bit. Megyn was opposed to me for years when I ran the first time and nothing stopped me, Trump said. And so, you know, some people are against, they always come back. She came all the way back, but now I guess she doesn't like the idea of this war. But I do, because I have to keep the nuclear weapons out of the hands of Iranians. Again, somebody who is a little more of that particular version of MAGA is the man who is the Secretary of War, formerly known as the Secretary of Defence, and Pete Hegseth spoke to this criticism directly today in Washington.
To the media outlets and political left screaming endless wars, stop. This is not Iraq. This is not endless. I was there for both. Our generation knows better, and so does this president. He called the last 20 years of nation-building wars dumb, and he's right. This is the opposite. This operation is a clear, devastating, decisive mission. Destroy the missile threat, destroy the Navy, no nukes.
Again, the details within the details, the counting of the grains of sand. It's why you watch. It's my duty to tell you about this stuff. So remember, part of this as well is about who wants to put their hand up to be the Republican candidate and potentially replace as president Donald Trump, yes, in 2028. Can you believe it? The election was just last year, the midterms are this year, and then effectively there is the shadow primary, then the primary and election in 2028. So we know JD Vance would be the leading person to take over, currently vice president. We know that Pete Hegseth might potentially consider himself to be a vice presidential candidate to a JD Vance, but there's another option in the room that may be where Trump ends up going, and that is the Secretary of State, the man who previously ran for president back in 2016, Marco Rubio. And he is pulling no punches. In fact, he's promising even bigger ones for Iran tonight.
Again, I'm not going to give away the details of our tactical efforts, but the hardest hits are yet to come from the U.S. military. The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now. Someone was screaming, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives, and we will achieve those objectives. The world will be a safer place when we're done with this operation.
So I know you're watching more than ever before in all of the different platforms, and thank you for turning to us for that latest information at skynews.com.au, our YouTube channels, this program and all of the other primetime programs at night, and of course with the very first news of the day and as it breaks throughout the day here on Sky News. But again, my focus each and every night is to try to give you that daily brush, but also to tell you the very latest part of the day. It does put a bit of pressure on us to have the latest information, but I make sure that that's what we have for you, and we'll do that in a nice little bit at the start of every night this week. But there's a country to talk about that's more important, of course, and that's ours. So let's get to it here. Now, as you know, inflation has been rising in Australia. It has been rising for many months, and we know that in part government spending is to blame. We know that at the last reports, that inflation was back to a 16-month high. The result of that was that we got an increase in interest rates in February of this year. The announcement was clear that 0.25 was the increase, and the expectation was that if inflation was set to increase, then they would get back and essentially erode the cuts that took place last year. There were 3 of them. They've undone one of them. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks. Well, war in the Middle East means that there is going to be another spike in inflation. See what I just said before when it comes to oil. But of course, this government, rather than accepting its own responsibility for the inflation problem that it has seen got out of control, the Australian inflation rate is higher today. In fact, the day before the war, it was higher than the US, the UK, New Zealand or Canada. But we have been prepared for the ultimate excuse for a government that has let inflation go back into the red zone.
The global uncertainty is really one of the defining influences on our economy at the moment.
We are living in a time of significant global uncertainty, and that reaches beyond just economic instability.
That global environment is going to constrain us, it's going to shape our choices, it's going to be such an important influence, and it's an important influence on monetary policies.
And secure the resilience of our economy in a time of global uncertainty.
People are still under pressure, and the global environment is so uncertain. A big focus of the budget will be inflation, but also productivity, and against the backdrop of this global economic uncertainty.
Well, of course, the expectation is that what you are seeing right now is going to affect inflation. It is mostly going to be petrol prices, but as we know, the cost of petrol prices, the problems that come as a result of energy, well, they feed into things. Petrol, which on the oil markets now is up 93% day on day, will eventually start going through the roof. That will affect inflation, meaning that will be what this government will blame for everything. But do not forget, for multiple months before a shot was fired, the problem was this government and our inflation was higher than anyone else. As Parliament has returned this week, there has been a lot of attention, understandably, trying to call the balls and strikes of question time about whether a new leader has done anything different for the Liberal Party. As I've shown you before, in both Newspoll and Redbridge, there's been no change to One Nation. The slight upticks have come 1 point off the Greens and 1 point off Labor, particularly when it comes to Newspoll. So there's a lot of pressure on how the Libs are performing in the Parliament. Andrew Clennell watches it every day for us and does a post-game straight after question time, about 3:15 on sitting days.
Look, with Angus Taylor in charge, it's more lively than it was with Susan Lee in charge. There's no doubt about it. We've only had 2 question times, but that's the signal at the moment.
But sadly, the forces inside the Liberal Party that seem to not be able to get out of their own way have not been able to get out of their own way, letting a bad government off the hook again. Last week, a ridiculous decision was made by several people in the upper echelons of the Liberal Party, which was to not release the review into the disaster that was the last federal election. Now, parts of this have been leaked and then they were tabled today for all to see and read, not by the Liberals, but by a Prime Minister wanting to make the subject anything but his own lack of performance.
Now, there's a little report, the review of the 2025 federal election, Mr Speaker, by those opposite. Now, I'm asked about transparency, Mr Speaker. They don't get to read their report, so I table it for them so that they can read the report about the diabolical campaign that they ran.
Now, I'm sorry, all of the people sitting up in the press gallery in the Prime Minister's pocket, giggling and clapping along, and all those MPs, you don't give any reward to the Prime Minister here, because when it comes to secrecy, he is the champion in Canberra. Remember when the Senate asked for documents about the effect of this government and electricity prices? Well, you got redaction, as if it was a national secret. We learned today that there are 169 things that have been put into the too hard basket and are being slow played the ball by the government that is trying to keep its own issues secret. And don't forget, this is a government that wants to automatically ban most people from being able to get information out of the government about the decision it is making by trying to change the freedom of information laws. So I get it, the bread and circuses game, but I will not cop any sort of a gold star for the Prime Minister rubbing his political opposition's nose in it. That said, the Liberal Party had problems. They had problems that we have talked about uphill and down dale since the events of May last year. I have been unabashed, unashamed in calling these out. and demanding a much better process about the side of government that 4.5 million people wanted to become the government, how they stuffed it up. They were leading in the polls, remember, but of course they lost big time. So, what is in the report? Recommendation 1, the campaign director is and must be a campaign professional whose job it is to run the campaign. The leader in his office must work extremely closely with the federal director and his team, or their team, sorry, it's not always a man, on planning and executing the campaign strategy and tactics, but it is the federal director as campaign director who must be seen as the one overall in charge of the campaign. Apparently, there was too much control that was happening from the former opposition leader and his team, apparently. I don't know what the examples are, but that's what they found. Recommendation 7. The parliamentary party, which has the privilege of determining federal party policies, must in future, especially in opposition, comply with its obligations under the Constitution to consult with the party organisation on the formulation of policy. So what, head office needs to be in charge of the ideas? Now remember, a lot of people who end up in head office, their loyalties aren't always necessarily to the success of those that are on the front line. And everyone knows about the factions. That would be a backdoor way of certain factions having control regardless of who the leader is. Recommendation 8. During the campaign, the leader should be, can you believe this? You're good enough to be the Prime Minister, but you should be accompanied by, on the travelling team, a senior parliamentary colleague able to provide alternative source of advice and to be able to link with MPs and candidates, as has occurred in previous federal campaigns. Now, again, that would seem to be logical. I don't know why it wasn't the case in 2025, but can you believe this makes it to writing? Recommendation 9, the party must never again rely on one research firm. It's noteworthy that the ALP had several polling companies, but the Liberal Party, as we know, it all backed in one who was also working for the National Party and other clients during the federal campaign. That was Freshwater, and their poll was rubbish. Recommendation 15. I go through this in detail because I'm guessing a lot of people watching this show voted for the side that lost badly, and hasn't even been able to be publicly honest about how and why it lost. Recommendation 15. The female vote is clearly a problem for the Liberal Party. This is a disgraceful line, by the way. The combination of a leader unattractive to women and policies or messaging that alienated women appears to have been a major factor in 2025. The review calls for another review into these things. Recommendation 16, this is the last one. Broadening the support of the base is necessary to reflect a more modern Australia. The party must develop renewal strategies, engagement with multicultural communities and young people, in which MPs are held accountable for their engagement efforts. Well, thanks, Scoop. But what about the Prime Minister today? Look at me, over here, I'm going to change the subject. How ridiculous.